Big welcome everybody to another episode of Leaders Link, where we invite special guests from around the world, leaders who are doing extraordinary things and have got something important to share about some of the big challenges in the world. And I'm thrilled to have Rebecca with us today, who is a fabulous active leader in the space of how we change the business system and really how we think about the economy. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lindsay Levin. I'm the founder of Leaders Quest. We help leaders and companies align profit and purpose to deliver a future where everybody can thrive within the means of the planet. Every time I say that, I'm very conscious of how idealistic it sounds, and I'm an unabashed idealist and thrilled to be talking today to somebody who can really speak to that very question. So a big welcome to all of you. Thrilled to have you with us. Thank you for making the time to join us. So a little bit about Rebecca. Rebecca and I met a few years back now, didn't we? And then we followed up and stayed in touch and found that we just had a huge amount in common. And I became a great fan of the amazing work, Rebecca, that you're doing. Rebecca's the John and Natty McArthur Professor at Harvard. She teaches, amongst other things, her elective on Reimagining Capitalism is the most popular elective at Harvard Business School of the last 5 years, and you'll say a little bit more about that in due course, Rebecca. An incredibly important topic that I think you're teaching on. She works with many different companies around the world, and for a long time her focus has been purpose-driven capitalism. I know lots of us on this call, whether we're part of the business world or social entrepreneurs or working in non-profits, this is one of the big topics that I know draws us all together. And just by way of introduction, Rebecca just published a book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a fantastic read. I was lucky enough, Rebecca, to read it just before the book came out. And I would say in a nutshell, part of what I really loved about it is, a big piece of my mission, if you like, in life, my own sense of purpose is about bridging gaps, bridging divides in the world. And how do we find ways to truly embrace, have conversations, build empathy, have mutual compassion across different perspectives? And I think one of the things you've done, I have to say, better than any business-related book I've ever seen, is to bridge that gap. It's a book that speaks to business and speaks to business leaders and does that with real empathy and really grounded in the reality of what it takes to run a business, large or small. But you don't cave in any way. I mean, clearly you're holding a vision of the world and a set of values and perspectives that are, I think, incredibly important. And somehow you manage to span that gap with incredible skill, I think, and with real stories. So highly recommend the book, and we're going to obviously talk some more about that. Let me start with the first question. And maybe for some people this is totally obvious and others less so, but why do we need to reimagine capitalism, and what do you mean by that?
Two things. The first is that capitalism is the only way out of our current problems. And so often, particularly younger people say, why do I want to reimagine capitalism? Why don't I want to throw it out the window? And so I want to reimagine capitalism because I think it's an unparalleled source of innovation and productivity and opportunity. But I think it's broken. It's broken in a number of ways I suspect we can all see. It's proving unable to deal with the major environmental problems we face, particularly climate change. It's proving to be unable to share the wealth that it's creating, both within societies and across the world. I think the current pandemic has highlighted for all of us that inequality is much more than simply a word, that so-called essential people have neither health insurance nor sick disability pay nor enough savings to enable them to stay home. And so our current capitalism is broken. So it needs to be reimagined. The question is, how?
And one of the things you speak about in the book is the need for, and opportunity, I guess, for everybody to have a sense of purpose about their own lives. And we'll speak later a little bit about your own sense of purpose, which I think is rather wonderful. You describe that at the end of the book. But could you speak a little bit about where you think business leaders are in terms of embracing the need, if you like, to bring the whole of themselves to what they do and put purpose at the core of business?
It's tough. For years, we have told business people that their moral duty and their economic interest is in maximizing profits, that maximizing returns to shareholders was the best way to drive prosperity and freedom, and was also actually required by law, and if you didn't do it, you'd be fired. So I think there's a lot of habit around this belief. What's so interesting, of course, is we said maximize shareholder value, but what we meant was meet your responsibility to your investors and grow prosperity and provide jobs and economic freedom. So even the drive for shareholder value was implicitly purpose-driven. You know, it's easy to dump on someone like Milton Friedman, but he, I believe, genuinely thought that if everybody maximized shareholder value, it would drive untold prosperity and economic opportunity. And those are fantastic things. The difficulty, of course, is if you tell people to maximize shareholder value and the whole system is out of balance, I think with this group I can say, if externalities are not properly priced, more colloquially, if you can dump greenhouse gases out the window, imposing immense social cost and not pay for it, and if you can drive your wages to the bottom and strip away all kinds of social protections from your workforce, that's not a free and fair society. It's not even free and fair capitalism. So when you ask me, well, how are we doing on purpose? I think thousands of business people are caught in this moment. They can see that things are not working. They want to do something differently. They're very attracted by purpose. And we have a really important vanguard, a serious set of purpose-driven leaders who are beginning to catalyze a different way of thinking about the whole system. And my experience talking to hundreds and hundreds of students and hundreds of business people is everyone wants to go there. Right. And I think that's the central idea. It feels to me as if we're on the edge of a serious transition.
Right, right. And do you have a sense of what some of the tipping points are that will help folks get over that? I mean, in some ways, this moment is, you know, it could go many ways, but this moment is asking a different level of stepping up, isn't it?
Every time a purpose-driven firm transforms its industry, that helps. Right. So, you know, when Impossible Foods had the best IPO in the last 20 years, everyone is like, whoa, okay.
Right.
People talk a lot about Elon Musk, who's a very complicated man, but it is true that his drive to change the world did probably accelerate the introduction of electric vehicles by 5 years or so.
Right.
So that's a tipping point. Right. A second tipping point is when firms come together to say, we have to stop behaving like this. So I think all the movements in agriculture around sustainable palm oil and sustainable beef and sustainable soy, those were tipping points. The realization that if the firms decided to act together, they really could shift the industry.
Right. Yeah, I'm often struck that this learning to collaborate, especially when competition has been the kind of watchword, we've got a long way to go as human beings in terms of our skills around this. You know, how do you collaborate across industries, within industries, across sectors, across countries and communities? And developing those skills actually takes some focus.
I think the good news is firms are realizing that they need to learn to do that. So that process is happening. And I don't know about you, Lindsay, I think what's happening in finance is hugely important. I mean, what do you think of universal owners? Do you think they're for real? Could the finance sector drive the change we need?
Well, Fallon, I wanted to ask you about that, because one of the things that I know as I look at the different faces on screen here, this is a topic for many people. So the question of what we measure, which you speak to brilliantly in the book, you talk about the evolution of the accounting sector and where we are now with measurements like ESG, environmental measures, social measures, governance measures. And of course, investors play a huge role in that, because there's a question of what are they asking, their investees, what are they asking as asset owners and asset managers, what are they asking of the businesses that they invest in? So I'd be interested in your view. I actually do think we're starting to really ramp up in a way that's very exciting. But maybe you could speak a little bit to that, including helping people make sense of this ESG thing, which actually feels like a hell of a muddle. If you're measuring profit, that's relatively easy, but measuring all these other things and knowing what you should be measuring and paying attention to, I think, is hard. So could you speak a little bit to the history in a way of that?
Oh, Lindsay, I love your technical term, a hell of a muddle. I think that's exactly right. ESG right now is a hell of a muddle, but it's still extremely important. One of the things I talk about in my book is my newfound appreciation for accountants. I used to think accountants were sort of boring, yes, do the plumbing kind of people. I now realize they're absolutely fundamental to modern civilization. And if we think of ESG as the next great evolution in accounting, I think it really helps. Back in the 30s, P&G published an annual report that said literally, our revenue is $5 million and our profit is 340,000. If you want to know anything more and you're a stockholder, you're welcome to apply to our headquarters in Cincinnati in person. So we forget it took 100 years to build modern financial accounting. And what we're in the middle right now is an attempt to extend accounting to measure material, non-financial factors that are central to the company's performance. And that's really important. That's important for every investor. Every investor should be asking, how engaged are your companies? How strong is your brand? Have you made long-term investments in your supply chain? And of course, one of the reasons ESG is a muddle is those questions are going to be different for every industry. So we're in the midst of trying to work out, like, what exactly do we measure? How do we make it auditable? How do we make it replicable? But when we do that, when we succeed, it's going to be incredibly important because, of course, what gets measured matters. So it's going to help firms switch. Investors who are beginning to think that purpose-driven firms are the leading edge, and that indeed responding to this moment is where we need to go, that this is a Kodak moment for the world, and the firms that see that and are moving are going to be the ones that succeed. They'll use ESG. And the third reason ESG is so important is to the degree that the very big financial houses, the people who own a significant fraction of the economy. I talk in the book about Hiro Mizuno, who was running the Japanese government pension fund, 1% of basically every financial asset on the planet. He's come to believe that things like climate change and inequality are not externalities, that fixing issues like inclusion is central to the long-term return for his portfolio. He has a fiduciary duty to do that. Well, how does he do that without ESG metrics? How does he move the firms in his portfolio? So if we're lucky, ESG becomes a way to help support firms cooperate to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah, no,
incredibly powerful.
Just to build on that for different people listening, as some of you know, one of the things Leaders Quest is leading right now is TED Countdown, which is a huge global movement around climate change. And one of the things I'm encouraged by is in the business world, there is starting to be much more conformity to some really ambitious goals that companies all over the world of all sizes need to commit to what we call a 1.5 degree world, a world where temperatures don't rise above 1.5 degrees, and that we need to do that by committing to science-based targets. And out of all that muddle, those things are starting to show up as the kind of gold standard, as it were, that people should be pursuing. Last year, between September and December, the number of companies committed to science-based targets doubled in 3 months globally. So it's, that you do get this non-linear progress once things start to take off. It's hard to, you've got to do it, which is a lot of really committed work year on, year out. I want to ask you, Rebecca, about the other side of your work, one of the other sides of your work, which is teaching at Harvard. And I'm thrilled that you have so many students choosing to study reimagining capitalism. I think from memory, it's about a third of the students. You'll correct me if that's wrong. But one of the things I've thought about a lot over the years is the role of business schools in frankly perpetuating the system that we've got. And at different points, we in Leaders Quest have looked at schools and tried to find, well, who has really embedded ethics or embedded, learning about our planet and thinking socially in business classes. And it's been really disappointing, frankly, the speed with which business schools have, I think, in my view, addressed that. So I'm interested to know your sense of, to what extent you think business schools are responsible for having produced all the leaders that in some cases haven't paid attention to, all the things we'd like. And where do you think business schools are in their own reinvention and reimagining of what it means to teach business leaders?
At the end of the beginning, business schools are incredibly conservative institutions. One way to think about it is, imagine I'm running the marketing course. I have 20 sessions. Every year we have a huge fight about what goes in each session. And there are 10 of us, and we're negotiating about what our students should learn. And yeah, I hear that sustainability is important. So we're now at the stage where we're pretty much getting 2 or 3 cases into every class that, yes, it matters. But I think what's really happening and will really accelerate change is that the students are demanding it. So at the Harvard Business School, the dean just invited me this year to take over the required course in leadership, ethics, and corporate governance.
Wonderful.
We have completely rebuilt that course to be about not only what I would call bread and butter ethics, do not insider trade, treat your employees, according to the law, but also what we might call systemic ethics. What is the role of business in this broader system? Let us do John Sterman's climate simulation, for those of you who know En-ROADS, which is amazing. The entire first year course went through his simulation. Let's give you a note on inequality. How do we think about it as business people? Let's show you businesses that are dealing with this. And my teaching group and the students have been so responsive to this approach. And my hope is to be helpful in supporting other schools in moving. Some business schools, of course, are amazing and far ahead of Harvard. So Yale or Michigan, there's a bunch of schools that are really always been pioneers. But I'm hoping that by doing this at Harvard, by releasing a course with cases, with teaching notes, with videos. I have an online version that a bunch of universities are using to teach Reimagining Capitalism. We try and make this mainstream. This is where things are going, not so hard to adopt. So raise the benefits, lower the costs. That's the strategy. But again, Lindsay, you say all kinds of nice things about my book, and I really appreciate it, but there are hundreds of business school faculty trying to make these connections and drive change, do the intellectual work of saying, wait, shareholder value has its problems. We need to think in different kinds of ways. So I'm just one, but I really feel like I'm part of an army.
Great. And you're, of course, now teaching students, many of whom, I guess all the ones graduating are coming out to an incredibly difficult economy and environment. Give us a sense of what you're hearing, not only in the graduating class, but also, in those just in their first year. What would you say has changed? What are some of the things that this next generation of would-be business leaders you think care about, and to what extent is it different to what's gone before?
I've been teaching students for 30 years. The last few years have seen such a dramatic shift. We asked the whole first year, do you think capitalism is broken? And 50% of the first year class at the Harvard Business School thinks capitalism is broken.
Right. We
talk about structural racism in the classroom. I've never talked about structural racism in a business school classroom before.
Right.
Students are passionate about inclusion, about inequality. They can't believe we're going to torch the planet to make ourselves money. Like, what is that? Now, not everyone, of course, but historically, I would have said maybe a third of the students was on this wavelength. I think it's much more like 70-75%. And the remainder are not hostile. They're just afraid we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
It's a real risk, right? So it feels to me like a completely different vibe in this group of millennials.
Right. Wonderful. Now, in a moment, I'm going to throw this open and invite people to share their questions. But before we do that, I'd love to just sort of speak to you, personally about your own motivation. This morning, I reread the last chapter of your book, which I totally loved, where you speak about John and you speak about your own sense of purpose and where your own, let me call it, in my words, spiritual energy comes from. And I think people would really value hearing that, for you to speak about what constitutes purpose for you and some of the things that have motivated you and led you down the particular path that you find yourself on.
I've always been passionate about the natural world, but for many years I just kept it in a box. That was something I did on the weekends or in vacations, and my day job was all about making firms more innovative. And then it was my brother, actually, who, when I was on sabbatical, started sending me pieces about climate change. And I was like, oh my God, I should just quit. And so I nearly quit being a business school professor. I thought, I'm just oiling the wheels of corporate capitalism. How am I spending my life? It was my friends in the green movement that kept me being a business school professor. And so that's a huge part of where things come from. But everything got turned up for me about 10 years ago when my first husband died unexpectedly. And he was a lovely man. He was an astrophysicist. He grew up on the run side of the tracks in New Jersey. And he spent his whole life just pouring out his energy. He would get on a plane and fly to California to talk to a high school class about the structure of the universe. This is one of the most highly cited astrophysicists of the 20th century. And he would do anything. And one day I came home from a business trip to find him on the floor with a heart attack, quite dead. I'd always been a Buddhist. I started practicing when I was quite young, when I was 17 or 18. And so I'd always intellectually believed what I think is the sort of heart of Buddhist faith, at least for me, which is we have good news and bad news. The good news is you're never going to die. The bad news is it's because you don't exist. And John's death really, really made that real for me in a deeper way. And I really believe, not as a kind of spiritual, metaphysical belief, but as a physical belief, that I am a bundle of electrons and particles that will dissipate, that I am a song the universe is singing. And so, what are we doing? Let's sing the best possible song we can. Sometimes people say to me, oh, you were so courageous to switch to climate. Well, how courageous can you be when you're a tenured faculty? One. But two, the world is burning. Let us do everything we can, because to cause untold suffering to so many people alive today and then hundreds of generations going forward, it just feels to me normal to do this. What else would we do? So that's how I think about purpose.
Fabulous, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Really, really wonderful. So on that note, Beth, are you going to tell people how to ask questions? We're going to give a chance now for people to raise their hand on the screen. Beth, let me pass to you to gather up some questions.
Great. Yeah, we'll take questions by using the hand raise function. If you're newer to Zoom, you can find the hand raise function. It will either be at the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll see a hand icon, and if you don't see that, you can click on participants, and then under the list of participants, you'll see a raise hand button there. So just raise your hand if you have questions, and we'll take a few at a time, and then hand those over to Lindsay and Rebecca. So one thing, as we get some hand raises, there were several comments and questions around shareholders and how we make the shift from shareholder to stakeholder and how we think about incentives. So I'll kind of set that as some context, and I'm sure it'll come up in some of these questions. So let's start with Madeline Parker.
Hi, does everyone hear me well?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rebecca. It's completely inspiring and was very well welcome to read your book as soon as it was accessible. Thank you ever so much. So just a background, so I'm a co-founder of newlife.ai. We are currently in the Farfetch Accelerator, bringing an architectural innovation to the fashion industry and aesthetics economy. We're based on a blockchain, and we're currently a decentralized social media app with big visions to contribute a sustainable architectural innovation to the fashion industry. I'm also based in Berlin in research with ESMT Business University. And what I would like to ask about is more about the communication of these challenges as something that is now positive, because as soon as you hear these words sustainability, as soon as we hear these, it's like a challenge. And something that I've been thinking a lot about in my research with the business school is a concept called the value economy. So actually, if we deduce everything down to sustainability, what we're really asking is, what do we value? And it's almost as simple as this. Do we value the fact that we treat our environment in such a way? Do we value the fact that we treat humans in this way? And I think that when we look at the evolution of the economy through industrialism, through the world wars, we've kind of been on this progressive track to losing sight of what you actually value. And what I wanted to express is maybe if we use something to do with the value economy rather than circular economy, which you can't relate to. This isn't a human relation when I hear the word circular economy. I hear it in a business term and it's operational and I can do something about it. But in general, it's not emotional, it's not helping people. And
Madeline, I'm going to stop you there. It's a wonderful question, but I want to get some other voices in. So brilliant. I've clocked you. The value economy communication, you really fabulous. Many thanks. Shall we call on Bruno?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi, Rebecca. There is now a tension between exiting or starting to exit the emergency phase of the epidemics and moving into the emergency phase of the economic crisis. There is a tension between the notion of restarting and the notion of building back better. Like a fork on the road, right? We have pushed a button, we have stopped the system, now we need to restart it, assuming we restarted, as it was before. Or creating something different, possibly better, addressing what you called the world is on fire before. I was wondering for your best guess in which direction we're going to go.
And I'm going to collect one more question at the risk of overwhelming you, Rebecca. So thank you. The build back better and the restart. I'm going to say your name wrong, for which I apologize, but Zaman, have I got that right? We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, you're right. And my mentor, I would like to mention that Mrs. Henderson. Ms. Henderson is my mentor, and I'm working as a CEO of Data Translation, which is localized and translation company. And we're having trouble right now about legalization process, which is documentation required hard copy. E-legalization process, e-payment process in some countries doesn't applicable. So how we can adopt an advocacy to our policymaker about this, that to adopting the digitalization service securely for the betterment. And we also like to know from Ms. Henderson that how it's gonna be sustainable in a better way for avoiding the cybersecurity risk.
Can I just ask you one question? Where are you based?
I'm based in Bangladesh, Dhaka.
Great, thank you for that question. So I'm going to pause for a moment because there's a lot for you to cover there, Rebecca, and I've got notes if you need them, but maybe you want to pick up wherever you want to across that wonderful range of questions.
Sure, let me try just a rapid fire response to each of them. So first, Madeline, I thought your suggestion, we need a new narrative and the value economy might be one of them, is potentially very powerful. Mariana Mazzucato at the University College in London has a fabulous new book out, which I think could be a great contribution to that debate. I think it's also really important not to lose sight of the fact that even in terms of old values, what we're doing now is not working. That, you know, if you only cared about shareholder value over some reasonable period of time, like more than the next 5 years, you should be really concerned about climate change. You should be really concerned about inequality. That I think is a central part of the conversation, because I think we need different narratives for different people. Restarting but building back better. Bruno, you want me to guess? Okay. If the Democrats win the election in November, I think the odds of our building back better are quite high. I've been really struck by the fact that since the pandemic began, people are much more open to the systemic problems we face, much more aware that things can go wrong, and much more aware that government can do things when it wants to. I think one of the most exciting aspects of the pandemic is it's really put a spotlight on the idea that a really free and fair capitalism that works for all of us requires free and fair government that is democratically elected, that is transparent, that is competent, that is capable. That didn't used to be a partisan idea. And if you look at the research, it's all about balance between business and government. And I think there's an appetite to move in that direction and for business to be helpful, or at the very least, stop being actively unhelpful. Which takes me to my last point about Rakuna-san. I am not an AI expert, but I do believe that it's critical for business to work together, to work with local government to address exactly these kinds of issues. That instead of just saying, oh, business is no good, which I'm sure you wouldn't do, but some business people do, or always inefficient, how do we think about building government that can be a partner for business? How do we think about building business that can partner with government in a way that's transparent, democratically accountable, but dedicated to the common good? That didn't used to be a crazy idea. I think we could get there again.
Fabulous. We've got a couple more questions that I'd love to pick up. One is Eric. Please go for it. Come off mute. Eric Harrington.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Eric.
Okay. Big question. We live in a finite world. A lot of people, including myself, think we need to get to a steady state economy at some point. I'm wondering whether you think capitalism can be reimagined to move away from the growth imperative to something approximating a steady state economy.
Lovely, lovely, Chris question. Brilliant. And Victor, would love to bring you in.
Okay, thank you very much for getting me in. I'm calling you guys from Dayton, Ohio in the United States. I got a question for Professor Henderson. When we talk about sustainability, most of the time I'm actually taking your courses that I'm finishing tomorrow. When we talk about strategies of business that sustainability, and we give examples of like Lipton tea, we give Barrick Gold and all those examples, even Walmart. Would it be possible that sometimes we include, those remote areas, especially like in Africa, those developing, so at least we can hear their perspective? Because normally some of these examples are taken from the United States or the UK perspective. And in fact, in that class, what I'm hearing is, oh, this is not really the reality. The reality is being told from one side. And so I strongly believe in this sustainability. It's a very good thing, but at least we should be able to be hearing the story from both sides. Because this corporate America, what it does is they go there, they come back and tell their story, when the actual story is also being told in a different way. Thank you very much.
That's a great challenge. Thank you. I'm just going to pick up two more and then I'll stop. So Karen Fasecki, would love to hear from you, Karen.
Hi, thank you. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for that wonderful talk. And I have to say, it just makes me so happy to hear people like you. And I love everything you say. My question is really around, how do we go from talk to action when it comes to getting away from maximizing shareholder value? there's a lot of, I mean, I work in finance, so, and capital really rules the world to a great extent. And capital still, how do we get capital to steer away from maximizing shareholder value? Because you have pension funds that are under enormous pressure to deliver pensions, institutional investors that for them to attract clients, they have to deliver the best returns. So the whole, all of society, and I mean, just go to oneself when we make investments, you know, how do we actually get away from not putting our capital that is going to deliver the quickest short-term return for us, particularly I think now as well in this world of, you know, this global crisis we're in, where people are getting even more worried and fearful of what's going to happen to their personal economy as well as their corporate economy. So how do we actually move from maximizing shareholder value to actually taking this seriously? I'm calling from Stockholm, Sweden, and here we have excellent rhetoric around this, but the real action is still not quite there. So I'd love to hear your answer. How can we do it?
Thank you, Rebecca. So if you wouldn't mind going at those three.
No, happy to do that. So Chris, steady state. Yes, but not yet. Think about the billions of people who are still existing on less than $8 a day. I think moving to no growth is not an option for us right now. And it creates all kinds of political difficulties that we also could not deal with. I think what we need is innovation. We need to dematerialize our economy, and we need to do it very quickly. Now, partly because I was a professor at MIT for 20 years where I taught innovation, I really think we can do it. If you look at what happened to the cost of solar power, when we start learning curves moving, they really move. And so I think innovation first. Once we get people to the level of everybody has food security, everybody has a place to live, everybody has physical security, then we can start to think about how do we dematerialize consciously. But in the short term, for me, it's all about innovation, it's all about capitalism, and that means it's all about getting the prices right. Victor, yes, it's a huge weakness in the online course you just took, and it's a weakness in my book. My apologies. I was writing the book for exactly these rich white male capitalists. I wanted to persuade them that there was a way to act differently and that a few people had tried it and done well. And so because it was written from that perspective and because I've spent my whole career working essentially with US and European businesses, that's the book I wrote. I completely agree. We need to know much more about what's happening from the other side, about sustainability on the ground in other countries. Critically important. Completely agree. Karen, moving from excellent rhetoric to actual action. Two things. First, I think we might get there on climate change. That when you have the governor of the Bank of England talking about climate being a potentially catastrophic risk to the economy, that people are starting to pay attention. One of the things I'm hearing is the pandemic is making people very much aware they were managing for low cost and efficiency. They were not managing for risk. And I think there's much more awareness of the need to manage for risk, both at the business level and at the finance level. There is a room in which 15 people get together occasionally. They control more than half of the world's invested financial assets, which is creepy. We could talk more about that. But it also means that if they really decided they wanted to address climate change, they could make a huge difference. And we're seeing actions like Climate Action 100 really pushing firms in productive ways. Inequality, I'm much less sanguine. I don't think we will build an equitable and sustainable economy until and unless we strengthen democratic government, that we move away from this idea that the free market can set its own rules, indeed can flood the political system with money to make sure it sets the rules in its own favor. So a big part of moving from action to rhetoric is a social and political movement to strengthen government. I think that business could be helpful in that movement, which is a very controversial suggestion, but I do think it's done before, and I think it might be possible now.
Rebecca, thank you. I'm conscious we've got a couple of questions still hanging, but we're going to need to draw to a close. I really want to thank you. It's been wonderful to have you with us. I'm sure people have really valued this. I also really appreciate everybody who's dialed in to join us. It's wonderful to have such a spectrum of people from around the world. So really thank you, all of you, for your attention. We'd welcome your feedback. You can find us at the Leaders Quest website. You can follow us on social media and provide feedback using the hashtag LeadersLink. Our next session will be next Thursday, 28th of May at 9 a.m. East Coast time, 2 p.m. in the UK, when I'll be talking to my good friend, the psychologist Melanie Katzman, about how we sustain human connection at a time of social distancing. She's just written a wonderful book called Connect First. It's full of very practical examples. She's been very much on the front line of all of this in New York. So I'd love you all to join us there. You can find this talk and previous talks on the website, and these sessions are open to anybody. So if you have friends, family, others that you'd like to invite in, please, this is a very open community. We'll send you all a follow-up note that will include links to Rebecca's book and other materials. I just shared, actually, just before we began, that a number of my colleagues are actually doing Rebecca's online course right now and getting huge value out of it. So for those of you who want to use your time a little differently whilst you're in this lockdown, I'd highly recommend it. But all that remains is to say a big thank you, Rebecca. Very good luck with the next wave of the work and the book. And thank you to everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.